Good morning. I take the opportunity to welcome the participants of the session Representations and Health and Nature in Art and Philosophy, part of the fourth meeting of the Portuguese Network of Environmental History, co-organized by the Center for the History of Society and Culture of the University of Coimbra. It is a pleasure to share and moderate this session. Participants will have 15 minutes for their presentation, and I will hold up a 5 minutes warning sign to discipline the session. As we are operating within a tight schedule, I will immediately give the floor to the first speaker, Sérgio Neto, from the University of Coimbra, that will present this work on literature and nature, a reading of the First World War. The word is for Sérgio.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Just a minute to prepare the thing. Okay, I think it's all okay. Okay. Hello, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I congratulate the organizers for the event, the Center for History of Society and Culture, in partnership with the Institute of Interdisciplinary Research of the University of Coimbra, and also the Center for Functional Ecology, for hosting the fourth meeting of report, the Portuguese Network of Environmental History. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. The aim of this presentation will be entitled Literature and Nature, a reading of the First World War, is to discuss how contemporaries perceived the impact of the conflict on nature. Okay, just a minute. The premise for this work can be deduced for two iconic images, very well known. First, the scars of war still visible in the fields of Verdun. They are known as the Zone Rouge, the red zone, a territory filled with explosives, filled with bodies, with remains, with bones. And second, the remains every year discovered in the Italian front. The Italian front was known as the White War in the Alps, in the snow. And due to global warming and the melting of the glaciers, the archaeologists have been discovering several objects and human remains. Of course, besides these sites of memory, deeply impressed in nature, there are other places that perpetuate the changing of the landscape as the result of conflicts. For example, abandoned village and towns. In any case, we must say that sometimes this happened due to remembrance purposes, not for the nature intervention. For example, the well-known church in Oradour-sur-Glane in France, or Belchite town in Spain, a town devastated by the Civil War. And of course, we all know other famous sites of memory like Hiroshima, or other sites of memory due to other causes like Chernobyl and the reactor explosion, or even more close to us, the church and the lighthouse in Fayal, Açores after the earthquake, etc., etc. I will discuss the several approaches, sort of state of the art. In first place, Paul Fussell, in a classic book from 1975, developed a literary approach on the writings of veterans, For example, in the chapter Arcadian Resources, he devised an almost mythical and nostalgic world of shepherds, sheep, birdsong, larks, nightingales, roses, poppies, gardens, sort of paradise lost by Milton. That is a kind of literary war where the British soldiers, we must remember that most of them were readers, Portuguese soldiers, most of them don't know how to write and read, but in any case, they transferred their disquiet, their literary knowledge to the landscapes of northern France. The second book is by J. Winter, a thesis about the sites of memory. It's the developing of Nora's concept, and Winter adding the subtitle as Sites of Mourning. This book is very interesting because Winter also discussed the tombs, statues, monuments to prevent oblivion, that is human imprints, not nature. On the other hand, he poses two important questions that I include in this work, and that is, did war change the views on traditional ways of bereavement? I mean, grief, sorrow, of the classic views of the 19th century. The other question I will pose later. The third book, with the title Landscapes of the First World War, was edited by Selena Daly, Martina Salvante, Vanda Wilcox, and is a contemporary approach on several subjects linked to my presentations. For instance, there are chapters about agriculture, about the land of the red soil, war ruins and industrial landscapes in Luxembourg, a chapter by Sandra Camarda, or other chapter that is entitled The Home of the World, War-Torn Landscapes and the Literary Imagination of a Bengali Military Doctor in Mesopotamia. I mean, there are works about not only the Western Front, more known, but also about the other fronts of the war. The hypothesis that we present in our work, the first one I made already. The second one, are we facing a traditional concern for nature inherited from the 19th century? Romanticism, what said the Romantic writers to the Industrial Revolution, or are we in this kind of literature more close to later fears from the 60s and the 70s, when the ecological movements, the modern ecological movement started? The other question is how contemporaries perceive different landscapes, and they departed from the rural Portugal. They found the Flanders fields, also Mozambique and Angola front during the First World War, the destruction witnessed, and how they reacted to native landscape. What did they find? How did they perceive? How did they read the fields? The places where they departed? Just a moment. Just a moment. Sorry. I give two examples for the 19th and the early 20th century. Thomas Cole, Course of Empire, it's from the 19th century. It's a series of 6 paintings about an emerging and then declining civilization. In the last painting after World War, civilization collapsed and nature regained their former territory. That's a kind of interpretation about rising and fall of civilization under a classic Hellenistic way of painting, of expressing columns and temples. The other example is the celebration of the tree in Porto Alegre. It's an image from newspapers from Porto Alegre in 1916, when Portugal declared war, when Germany declared war on Portugal. And this is a kind of classical interpretation of nature linked to the French Revolution, and was introduced. The celebration of the tree in Portugal in the early 20th century, with a political and somewhat ecological avant-la-lettre propose. Sorry, I didn't show the second image. It's from a newspaper, and is for the children in school, a text about the importance of forests and tree. Also for this period that I'm talking about data and methodology. I underline a comparative reading of different kinds of literary sources, testimonies, memories, some kind of fiction, novels, short stories and plays, but also press, reports. In the second phase of this project, of this article, to enlist other sciences in this analysis. Let's move on. I will give some examples, some classical examples from British and French literature. First one from the French literature, a well-known novel, Le Grand Repos, that in English is translated as The Slaughterhouse. And the other is a very well-known book for children, L'Homme qui plantait des arbres, from the French writer Jean Genot. This is a kind of very interesting book about nature in the First World War, because in Le Grand Repos there is a character named Émile Régotat that records testimonies about animals, forests, and in the slaughterhouse of the trenches is more concerned with the nature than with man. It is a very interesting vision from the First World War in a very well-known novel. The other well-known example is from Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is a very well-known several novels about, yes, thank you very much, about 5 minutes. There is a kind of ecological and comparison about with the trenches. I will move on to see to have some opportunity to express the Portuguese sources. The first one is from Jorge Castro Cruz de Guerra, 1923, is a play, and in this play the author tries to create a relation between the return of soldiers, a development of the First World War that is the unknown soldier, and a return to the earth, a return to the land. This is interesting, and because there is a relation between the trees and the dead, and the renewal of nature within the unknown soldier return to Portugal. It is like the kind of relation that could be made. The other is from memories. I will show only 2 or 3. A text from Jaime Cortesão, from his memories, about a place somewhere in the trenches, but we could also find places that are very easy to locate, like a city where, in this case, André Brun, other soldier, other Portuguese officer in the trenches, give a more precise location, a more precise information what happened. And of course, this kind of description, this kind of way of talking about things can be compared with photographs and description from the present, from nowadays. I will move on to the conclusions right away to keep my timetable. It's still a work in progress, because we have to collect other texts. The quotations that I made were quotations for very well-known texts, very well-known books. There are, of course, other sources that can be used. It is a theme or a project to develop gradually probably with the help of a worldwide network, or to organize in the first place congresses or some kind of way of giving to know this work. We will use a comparative method, and probably to establish links with other arts and form expression. I give an example about movies, about literature, but I jumped an example from music, from Vaughan Williams, a British composer, with music that could be related both to the Industrial Revolution in England, but also with the experience a stretch barrier in the Western Front, and also he was on the Western Front, but also in Salonika Front in Greece, where he was stretch barrier and also was on the artillery service. In the fourth, probably also a well-established connection with conflicts all around the world, contemporary conflicts, or even with the conflicts, if we choose a Portuguese way of dealing with this subject, probably with colonial war, with Mozambique and Angola, because they are also stages of the First World War and also the colonial war in the 60s and the 70s. And I think I try to be on timetable. I thank you all your attention, and I think the honor to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sérgio, for your interesting work in progress, as we show us, and for respecting the time to the other participants can use their time. And now, immediately, I have the pleasure to introduce now Isabel Alves from the University of Trás-os-Montes and Alto Douro, that bring us a paper entitled "How Do You Have Hope? Sandra Steingraber's Search for Ecological Roots of the Cancer in Living Downstream." The work is from Isabel.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope you'll be able to see my PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Yes, but
okay,
you
fine.
Can put in the
Okay, is this
thank
okay?
You very much. It's
okay.
correct.
So okay, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me or to my presentation. Usually I work on literature and eco-criticism, and so it's a great pleasure and an enriching experience to be among colleagues from different areas. And so I'll start. I'll be talking about this book, Living Downstream, an ecologist's personal investigation of cancer and environment, by Sandra Steingraber. And she published this book in the first edition is from 1997, and the author, Sandra Steingraber, a biology major with a fondness for modernist poetry, and who discovered at the age of 20 she had blood cancer, reflects in chapter 9 on water, the one we drink, but also the polluted water of oceans and rivers and groundwater. Sorry, I'm trying, okay. Filled with that data, mainly on the USA reality and particularly on the state of Illinois, her consideration mostly intend to direct the reader's attention to the natural resources, arguing that their healthy existence offer an opportunity for healthy environment and healthy bodies. Ecologically speaking, and I'm quoting, everyone drinks from aquifers. All running surface water was at one time groundwater, aquifers being the mother of rivers, unquote. Though their existence should enhance health, rivers, oceans, and aquifers have, however, been contaminated throughout the years, and thus the chance of everyone becoming contaminated is real, Steingraber contends. If more specifically, Living Downstream is interested in demonstrating the relationship between environment and cancer, from a general point of view, Steingraber's work explores how the loss of natural environments and ecosystems are increasingly responsible for the degrading of human health and well-being. Interestingly, in the face of troublesome data, Steingraber ends that same chapter by calling the reader's attention to the need to cultivate the ability to imagine. By imagining, for instance, the vast basins beneath us, every image is like a kettle boiling on the stove, a sprinkler spraying over the garden, a bathtub filling up, would resonate differently in the human spirit. Humans would care more for water landscapes if they knew better, if they imagined them more profoundly. One knows, as Steingraber highlights, each human life is related to water in many and vital ways, but due to the lack of connections with nature in general and with water in particular, humans have either polluted it or remain indifferent and unimaginative towards that source of life. My argument is that Steingraber's awareness about the unpleasantness of her subjects puts herself in the role of the seducer, interweaving scientific data and a poetic observation of reality, namely the passage of seasons, the snow, the running water, buds, awakening roses. Living Downstream fulfills what Steingraber understands as her mission, wish that statistics and embellished words may result in a positive impact on public health and on the protection of the environment. My purpose thus is to highlight Steingraber's literary strategies for delivering her perception on the relationship between environmental contamination and human rights. For Steingraber, the story of the threat to human health created by the reckless pollution of the living wall requires courage to imagine an alternative future. Not by chance, in that same chapter, she quotes Walt Whitman and Robert Frost. Sorry, I don't know what happened here, sorry. Oh, this should not help. I'm here, okay, sorry. She quotes Walt Whitman and Robert Frost, two American poets who cultivate strong feelings for nature in their poetry. Whitman's verses insist that by paying attention to nature, humans become more open to its gifts, inviting his fellow humans to see themselves as actors in natural cycles and not as obstacles. Also, like Frost, Steingraber intends to keep asking what to make of a diminished thing. Particularly in the last century, the complex interdependence between rivers, earth, air, and human bodies, which has lost relevance, become a diminished thing due to human insistence in destroying, contaminating, and polluting. My reading of Steingraber's work is grounded in eco-criticism, the environmental approach to literary texts, which questions how artistic representations envisages human and non-human webs of interrelation. As Lawrence Buell argues, we artists, critics, teachers, can attempt to speak from the standpoint of understanding humans as part of what Aldo Leopold called the biotic community, that is, to speak in cognizance of human being as ecologically or environmentally embedded. My suggestion is that Steingraber's rhetorical strategies, the symbolic and emotive language she uses, are important literary tools with which will desirably affect and alter the reader's response to a global concern about nature. In this sense, I agree with Greg Garrett's statement, compelling readers to reflect on health as an important metaphor, a rhetorical bridge between an individual human subject and the ecological web. And I quote, "From assessments of individual ecosystems to representations of the whole Earth, the metaphor of health provides us with a readily understood, emotive way to comprehend matters of stunning complexity, such as climate change, biodiversity, and ecological resilience." In Nature Cures, or How to Police Analogies of Personal and Ecological Health, Garrett's analysis of living downstream leads him to comment, Steingraber weaves an emotive narrative of disease into a reflections of environmental health, applauding her courage to force her way upstream toward the sources of pollution, which are often also the loci of immense social and political power. Furthermore, according to the critic, her key trope is trespass, the body violated by carcinogenic chemicals, the author's own and that of every other sufferer, contrasting with her other image throughout the book of natural bodies struggling to be free of the mortifying toxins that increasingly plague the world. In this vein, I would like to suggest that Living Downstream falls into the tradition of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Terry Tempest Williams' Refuge that interweave stories of body vulnerability and polluted water bodies, highlighting the correlation between environmental tragedies and human illnesses, or in the words of Anthony McMichael, how do disruptions of ecosystems and losses of species and local populations of species affect human biological and psychological functioning, the advent and progression of disease processes and measurable outcomes, deaths, hospitalization, disabling injuries, and serious mental health disorders. Relevant to my argument is that each of the above-mentioned works shed light on the relationship between public health deficits, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, all the authors believing nonetheless in the power of the embellished word to catch the reader's attention. Living Downstream is divided into 12 chapters, their titles evincing target, intensity, and poetic effect. However, the expressive titles disclose unpleasant aspects of contemporary life in USA, in the Western world, and in the USA in particular, namely, as aforementioned, the relationship between cancer and environment. Also, the titles are the epicenter of Steingraber's plea for greener re-engineering and greener chemistry. She is unswerving in her convictions. The most direct way to prevent cancer is to stop putting cancer-causing agents into our indoor and outdoor environments in the first place. Contextualizing geographically and historically her own story, she states, "As a biologist, I will tell you that my Illinois home is utterly unexceptional. As in many other communities, the dramatic transformation of its industrial and agricultural practices that followed World War II had unintended environmental consequences. Thus, in the first pages of Living Downstream, Steingraber describes Illinois as a healthy agricultural landscape. About 87% of Illinois is cropland. You could say that we are standing at the beginning of a human food chain. The molecules of water, earth, and air that rearrange themselves to form these beans and kernels are the molecules that eventually become the tissue of our own bodies. This statement becomes so much more relevant when contrasted with another assertion. Illinois soil holds darker secrets, such as the one Steingraber unveils. To the 87% of Illinois that is farmland, an estimated 54 million pounds of synthetic pesticides are applied each year, the most abundantly used being the weed killer atrazine, a pesticide which remains the most frequently detected in water throughout the USA. In terms of environmental history, the statement is provocative. 10,000 years of tall grass prairie have left a fainter trace on the place I call home than 27 years of DDT, 46 years of PCBS, and 50 years of atrazine. Approaching her subject as an ecological investigation, Steingraber reveals the effect of contaminants not only in her body, but also in the environment and their impact on the ecology of water, soil, air, and animals. For instance, she uses the data about the beluga population of the St. Lawrence River to show that belugas inhabiting areas of the St. Lawrence polluted waters have a higher incidence of cancer than the belugas living in the Arctic Ocean. According to the researchers' data, these observations suggest that the human population and the population of long-lived, highly evolved mammals may be affected by specific types of cancer because they share the same habitat and are exposed to the same environmental contaminants, end quote. The fact that belugas love to eat eels and travel as far as the Sargasso Sea, a place that accumulates seaweeds and debris and chemical pollutants from all over the Atlantic and from the US and Caribbean coasts, their bodies transmit contaminated substances that they pass on to belugas. On this topic, and as Greg Garrett emphasizes, although Steingraber never establishes an analogy between the sick whales and the author illness, she, like an accomplished novelist or clever advertiser, leaves the white space between disparate elements to be filled with the reader's own inferences, unquote. The last chapter of Living Downstream, and while she drives towards the place where an incinerator was to be built near Illinois River, her home place, she listens to music on the radio, Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis. While listening to the music, she is weighing the effects of the incinerator against the harmony of music, and in the process begins to imagine the river red horse, an endangered fish species resting quietly in a current of water. The confluence of the image of the fish in the clean water and the musical notes build an imaginative, healthy landscape, a place where humans interact peacefully, serenely, and beautifully with all living things. Made of words, that balanced world, an ecological world of fluidity and harmony, is presented as an alternative world, a possibility that may challenge each reader to dare to imagine a future in which the right to an environment free of poisoning substances is a reality. To imagine such a possibility is an act of attentiveness and responsibility towards the world, and helps to answer her initial question: how do we have hope? To conclude, however briefly, I hope I was able to present Sandra Steingraber's Living Downstream as an example of how literary texts are powerful instruments which help reinforce public concern about the fate of the earth, about humankind's responsibility to act, about the shame of environmental injustice, and about the importance of vision and imagination in changing minds, lives, and policies. Steingraber is convinced that the music metaphor is indicative of the only way to follow. And I quote, "It is time to play the Save the World Symphony, a vast orchestral piece in which you are not required to play a solo, but to figure out what instrument you hold and play it as well as you can." She adds, "In the end, the environment is not just something else to worry about. It is connected to all the things we already worry about: our children, our health, our homeland, and love with all our hearts." Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for this presentation, with also an alert to us, to all the people, about the nature and the problems they can put us. And immediately I give the word to António Costa from the new University of Lisbon, that will speak about the representation of nature in the second half of the 19th century, the field diaries of the family Pereira Palha in agriculture, as the Pereira Palha's agriculture's house. The word is yours. A problem with sound? António?
Está-se a ouvir agora?
Yes, agora
boa.
sim, agora está.
E o PowerPoint está em modo de apresentação?
Também está a ver-se.
Em modo de apresentação?
Acho que não, em modo de apresentação. Agora, tenta ir carregar.
Agora está? Não.
Agora está, mas no meu fica grande demais. Não sei se nos outros ecrãs.
Sim.
Vou tentar.
É melhor assim.
É melhor assim, é melhor assim. É melhor continuar assim.
Certo. Muito boa tarde a todos. Antes de mais, agradecer à professora Maria Helena a apresentação e agradeço também a toda a comissão organizadora. Para não falar muito tempo, vou começar. Então, como já devem ter percebido, por causa da introdução da professora Maria Helena, a minha comunicação tem a ver com a representação da natureza na segunda metade do século XIX, tendo em conta os diários de campo da Casa Agrícola da família Pereira Palha. Como sabemos, a representação da natureza na arte, na filosofia e nas narrativas históricas e literárias, ao longo dos séculos, tem sido sempre uma constante. É evidente, como já percebemos, que a natureza não é representada da mesma maneira, nem com o mesmo pormenor nas várias narrativas históricas e literárias que existem em Portugal. Não só pelo facto das narrativas serem escritas por vários punhos, mas também pela temática, género e finalidade que caracteriza cada qual. Nesta comunicação, pretende dar-se a conhecer um conjunto relativamente pequeno de 13 diários de campo, pertencentes ao tombo da Quinta das Areias e que se encontram arquivados no arquivo particular da família Pereira Palha. O conjunto em causa seria certamente constituído por mais manuscritos, mas os efeitos do tempo não permitiram que chegassem aos nossos dias, dizendo estes respeitos ao período corrente entre 1852 e 1876, ainda com algumas falhas temporais. É ainda a intenção apresentar um conjunto de pinturas e fotografias do final do século XIX, que ilustram alguns exemplares do gado que compunha a ganadaria da mencionada casa agrícola, sendo um exemplo daquilo que é a representação da natureza na pintura, ainda que o foco principal desta comunicação seja a representação da natureza nos diários de campo. Procurar-se ainda demonstrar de que maneira os mencionados diários são úteis e de grande importância, na medida em que podem servir de auxílio ao estudo das seguintes matérias: das alterações climáticas, do impacto direto do homem na paisagem e no espaço rural, e na evolução e desenrolar da agricultura numa exploração concreta. Na fotografia temos o chateau da Quinta das Areias, onde está ativada esta documentação. Para contextualizar, vou primeiramente fazer uma breve nota histórica sobre a casa agrícola da família Pereira Palha, na Ilha Ribatejana. Portanto, a casa agrícola da família Pereira Palha, que reporta esta comunicação, foi fundada na Ilha Ribatejana em pleno século XIX, por António José Pereira Palha de Faria da Serra, que é o senhor que está representado no retrato do lado esquerdo. E foi largamente desenvolvida pelo seu filho José Pereira Palha de Lã. É este último que, a partir de 1870, se dedica ao progresso e desenvolvimento da agricultura, abrindo o espírito à investigação e à experiência, com a aquisição de algumas das primeiras máquinas agrícolas que chegaram a Portugal, procurando assim tirar um empreendimento assinalável da terra que permitisse o referido progresso e desenvolvimento. É claro que isto só foi possível com a abolição do pequeno morgadio em 1832 e do grande morgadio em 1863. Isto permitiu a divisão e a venda de propriedades pelos morgados, sendo um exemplo disto a venda da Quinta das Areias e da Quinta do Cabo, que Fernando Pereira Palha Osório Cabral, na altura presidente da Câmara de Lisboa, faz ao seu primo José Pereira Palha Blanco e à sua tia Dona Laura Rodrigues Blanco em 1872. Eu refiro esta venda porque são algumas das propriedades a que fazem referência as descrições literárias e as representações iconográficas. Por isso é que eu achei importante salientar. É importante também ainda referir que já há alguns anos antes, António José Pereira Palha de Faria da Serra tinha comprado algumas propriedades na Ilha, nomeadamente a Quinta de São João e a vinha Nova das Areias, contígua também à dita Quinta das Areias. Era tudo muito junto. Pronto, nas fotografias temos as pessoas que nos vão a falar. Relativamente aos registros agrícolas técnicos, é preciso perceber que há uma grande diferença entre os registros agrícolas e os diários de campo que eu aqui refiro. Os registros agrícolas tiveram desde sempre presentes na administração das casas agrícolas, sendo, portanto, comum encontrá-los ao longo dos séculos na gestão agrícola, ainda que divirjam na maneira como eram produzidos. E ainda que fosse comum haver esses registros diversos das casas agrícolas, na viragem do século XIX, o que distingue estes diários de campo dos típicos registros e notas que eram escritos por proprietários, administradores ou feitores, é o facto de estes não serem apenas registros técnicos e económicos, mas antes uma descrição diária, quer dizer, minuciosa e relativamente aprazível, dos tempos, dos serviços de lavoura, das quintas e dos movimentos dos gados em plena Ilha Ribatejana. Na obra Empresa Agrícola, as escolhas do feitor à gestão ambiental, coordenada pela professora Maria Inês Amorim Mancini, são referidos uns diários, que são os pandemónios, escritos por Pereira Cortês entre 1867 e 1889, que, para além de apresentarem informação contábil, continham também à mistura relatos sobre o cotidiano da exploração na zona de Serpa e da família. Mesmo assim, não são tão detalhados quanto os diários que aqui se apresentam. A maneira como estes diários de campo são feitos, além de ser exemplificativo de uma prática de gestão agrícola estruturada e própria de uma época, não só apresentam uma caracterização, como eu já vinha a dizer, pormenorizada do estado do tempo, que num estudo aprofundado poderiam servir de auxílio das alterações climáticas que aconteceram com o passar dos séculos, como também permitem compreender o impacto direto do homem na paisagem do espaço rural e a própria evolução da agricultura naquela exploração concreta. Esta intervenção direta do homem na paisagem é perceptível através dos vários trabalhos agrícolas executados pela força humana, animal ou tecnológica, destacando-se, pelo menos nestas descrições, o trabalho executado pelos valadores. Eu destaco aqui os valadores porque era uma profissão que caiu em desuso e que era desenvolvida essencialmente por homens que conquistavam a Lesira e os Mochões ao rio, carregando terra para cima dos valados com o objetivo de impedir que a água inundasse essas terras férteis. Estavam também encarregues de abrir e limpar e reparar as valas. há muitas referências a estes trabalhadores nos diários, como já disse, e também há referência aos ranchos migratórios que vinham para o Ribatejo em busca de trabalho. Eu acho importante destacar isto pelo facto de, quer dizer, perceber-se um bocadinho o trabalho agrícola e como é que funcionava uma exploração agrícola, ainda por cima de profissões que hoje em dia, como eu dizia, viram em desuso. Há ainda outros dois aspectos que estes diários não vão conhecer, nomeadamente a vida social e os conhecimentos astronómicos da época. É muito interessante porque, tal como os pandemónios que falavam da gestão da casa agrícola e também da família, por vezes nestes diários também acontece isso. O primeiro aspecto da vida social é, por exemplo, estudado na morte do referido António José Pereira Palha de Faria Lacerda. Por acaso, no dia em que ele morreu, vem lá fazer uma descrição completa do que é que aconteceu nesse dia e como é que foi a situação. E também dos dias em que não haviam serviços por serem dias santificados de guarda. Quer dizer, isto permite também compreender um bocadinho as mentalidades da época e como é que a sociedade funcionava. Quanto aos conhecimentos astronómicos da época, também são perceptíveis nestes diários, porque eles mediam, ou seja, os indícios de chuva eram medidos pelos astros, eram dependidos pelos astros. Alguns destes diários já faziam parte das propriedades em causa, que foram adquiridas por José Pereira Palha Blanco, pelos seus pais, mas ao que parece, eles seguiram com a compra, ou seja, quando as propriedades foram compradas, já era hábito fazer-se estes diários, e então continuaram-se a fazer. Vê-se algumas diferenças, porque os diários mais antigos, a maneira como são feitos é um bocadinho diferente dos mais recentes, mas a lógica é sempre a mesma. Quanto à origem destes diários, quer dizer, fica-se um bocadinho aberto, porque não se percebe o motivo que terá levado a fazê-los, ou como é que eles começaram, porque é que depois continuaram. E apesar de alguns destes diários terem desaparecido, possivelmente com mudanças e limpezas ao longo dos anos, ou com as várias cheias que também ocorreram em Vila Franca de Xira, houve muita informação que desapareceu. Como eu estava a dizer, para além desta representação literária da natureza, há também uma coisa muito interessante nesta casa agrícola, que é a representação da natureza na pintura e na fotografia. Por exemplo, neste caso concreto, há um conjunto de pinturas, cerca de 24 retratos do século XIX e 3 fotografias. Isto são importantes porque permitem conhecer, quer dizer, alguns organismos vivos dessa época que não era normal conhecer-se hoje em dia, pelo menos. Nomeadamente os touros bravos que pastavam na Lesíria e os cavalos que auxiliavam os trabalhos na lavoura. Julga-se que o motivo que levou à representação destes animais em fotografias e em pinturas se deverá ao elevado interesse de José Pereira Palha Blanco na criação dos touros bravos, cuja genética procurou cruzar e apurar com todas as seleções científicas, e também o seu interesse pela agricultura em geral. Segundo a memória oral da família, os retratos dos touros bravos dizem respeito aos primeiros touros da ganaderia de Palha Blanco, que foram usados para os referidos cruzamentos e apuramentos da raça. É possível observar nestes retratos touros portugueses que estão marcados, por acaso nestas fotografias não sei muito bem porque os quadros estavam no restauro, mas estão marcados com um P e com uma cruz, e podemos ainda ver alguns touros de ganaderia espanhola, nomeadamente com Sierra, Miura e Garagua. Por exemplo, aqui também ainda são touros portugueses, mas se repararmos aqui, já conseguimos perceber mais ou menos que estes são touros espanhóis. Porquê? Porque aqui o ferro, na parte de trás do touro, por exemplo, aqui, se não estou em erro, parece um C e um S. Portanto, é com Sierra. Isto é interessante para perceber, quer dizer, que em Portugal também, quer dizer, haviam animais, gado, dizendo assim, de outras regiões que não o nosso país. Isto tudo pertence à coleção da família Pereira Palha. Aqui estão os outros dois que são posteriores, mas também pertencem ao século XIX. Quanto às 3 fotografias da época, 2 retratam os touros de Lesíria, a serem conduzidos pelos campinos, e outra, muito interessante, retrata uma ceifeira a ser puxada por cerca de 20 cavalos manipulados de escorpiões. Quer dizer, isto à época é uma coisa pouco comum em Portugal, e numa dissertação que também estou a trabalhar, conta-se que havia apenas, pelo menos as chafeiras puxadas por cavalos, conhece-se apenas esta, e agora não me recordo, não sei dizer a outra, mas há outra, depois se houver interesse eu posso referir. Quanto à importância dos diários de campo para o estudo das alterações climáticas. Se entendermos o clima como a média das condições meteorológicas de uma determinada região, considerarmos que as condições meteorológicas correspondem ao estado do tempo, percebemos que são vários os fatores e os processos que permitem determinar o estado do tempo e o clima de uma determinada região. Podemos defini-lo mais precisamente, no entender de Pedro Aguiar Pinto e Ricardo Braga, como a descrição estatística do tempo em termos de médias e desvios de determinados parâmetros relevantes ao longo de várias décadas, tipicamente 3 ou seja, 30 anos, sendo a temperatura, a precipitação, o vento, entre outros, os parâmetros mais relevantes. É neste sentido que os diários de campo aqui apresentados assumem a importância no estudo das alterações climáticas, uma vez que apresentam descrições pormenorizadas e diárias do estado do tempo. Ainda que não permitam elaborar uma descrição estatística em termos médios, como anteriormente se referia, pelo facto de não abrangerem um período de pelo menos 3 décadas e de não apresentarem valores concretos, mas apenas descrições literárias, permitem chegar a algumas conclusões e traçar uma ideia climática na região específica da Algésia ribatejana na segunda metade do século XIX. Poder-se-á mesmo chegar a fazer comparações com os dados disponíveis para a região em causa nas décadas de 50 a 70 do século XX, tentando perceber se as alterações climáticas que ocorreram num período de 100 anos. É curioso que quando se aborda a temática das alterações climáticas, o pensamento generalizado da maioria das pessoas foca imediatamente os dias quentes de verão em pleno outono ou inverno, ou então os dias de inverno em plena primavera ou verão, pelo menos o senso comum. É curioso que já no século XIX, também para espanto de muitos, estes dias ocorriam e são exemplos, por exemplo, os primeiros dias de novembro de 1876, que nos diários são descritos como tendo amanhecido claros e com sol quente como de verão na força do dia. Quanto ao impacto do estado do tempo e do clima na agricultura do século XX, há ainda uma questão que, antes de concluir, valia a pena explorar. Será de facto o estado do tempo e o clima que tem impacto na agricultura, ou será precisamente o oposto, sendo a agricultura que tem impacto no estado do tempo e no clima? Eu faço esta questão porque, na atualidade, a agricultura é muitas vezes apontada como uma das principais responsáveis pelas alterações climáticas que se tem vindo a verificar. Não querendo aprofundar este tema, porque já não vem muito tempo e por não ser também a minha área de estudo e não ter particular interesse para esta comunicação, refiro apenas que os ditos Pedro Aguiar Pinto e Ricardo Braga contrariam esta crença generalizada de que a agricultura contribui às alterações climáticas, tendo um estudo científico sobre a questão, onde abordam a problemática das alterações climáticas e o papel da agricultura como um instrumento de mitigação dessas mesmas alterações. Pronto, com a documentação em causa, os referidos diários de campo, podemos deduzir que, pelo menos no século XIX, não havia dúvidas de que era o estado do tempo e o clima que tinham um grande impacto na agricultura, provocando por vezes crises agrícolas, uma vez que esta atividade económica se desenvolvia e continuava a desenvolver ao ar livre, dependendo quase exclusivamente das condições meteorológicas. Não vou ler estes dois exemplos, mas depois, quem tiver interesse, eu posso facultá-los, ou quando a sessão está a ser gravada, podem depois ler. Para concluir, insistir uma vez mais na importância destes diários, quer seja para o estudo das alterações climáticas, realizando estudos comparados com os dados registrados no século XIX, quer para a compreensão do impacto do homem na paisagem do espaço rural, ou ainda para uma análise da evolução exemplar da agricultura numa casa agrícola de grandes dimensões de ribateiras. Dizer ainda que, aos eventuais interessados nestes diários, estou a colocar a hipótese de os transcrever e eventualmente publicar, como podemos ver, interessem em muitas áreas para vários estudos. Obrigado pela atenção.
Professora Maria Helena está sem som, por favor.
Muito obrigada, António, dizia, por esta apresentação dos diários de uma casa agrícola, concretamente aqui da Casa Pereira Palha. Thank you. And now, let me welcome the colleague and friend Inês Amorim from the University of Oporto, that will share with us a research on health, hygiene, and differential consumption of salt in the British and Portuguese Indian Empire. The word is to Inês Amorim.
Thank you. Sorry, because I forgot to open the sound, so I have already opened the presentation and not the sound. Sorry. Thank you so much for your kind words, and good afternoon for all colleagues. Well, the subject you have in the title, and I'm going to read, I prefer, but please interrupt me, Professor Helena, if
Inês Amorim.
Yes.
I'm Bruno Val from Technical Support.
Yes.
You are sharing the presentation view screen to everyone. So we're seeing your notes and the slideshow. I'll ask you to end the slideshow presentation and share the window with the slideshow, not the slideshow presentation.
Sorry. I'm going to see if I understand. I'm going to open.
Yes, the PowerPoint.
Share. It's okay?
Okay, now put it in full screen.
It's full screen now?
No.
No.
Do you have two screens, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Okay. So when you share screen, you must select the second screen.
Okay. I'm going to share. I'm going to share. And now?
Now we're seeing the PowerPoint.
And now I'm going to. But the problem is
over there. Have you selected already? Yes, over there.
It can't open. I'm not sure why. Well, I believe that I must present, because I don't know why it's not opening like a model.
Do you have two screens, right?
Yes, yes.
In one screen, you have the presentation in full screen?
Yes,
already.
On the right. Okay.
Yes. So when you share screen, you have an option to share the full screen, the whole screen, right?
Yes.
So you must select the screen where the presentation is running already.
Yes, and I'm doing, but you can see the presentation not in full screen.
Now we're seeing the PowerPoint.
Yes, the PowerPoint, but not full screen.
Not full screen.
Okay, it's okay. We are not going to lose time. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Technical never happened this before, but there's always a first time. So thank you so much. Sorry. Well, I'm going to control my time. In the second half of the 19th century, the concerns about the hygiene and physiology of salt, that means the relationship between salt and health, were at the center of the medical discourses related with the struggle against virulent diseases. To analyze these connections, we are guided by a remarkable text, the Handbook of Common Salt, published in 1882 by the military surgeon James Rayton, Major of the Madras Army of the British Empire of India. His arguments to justify why salt was the strength of the nation, political, commercial, sanitary, and health, were based on a large comparative research about salt production methods in Europe and in the British India, and the constraints to its commercialization, namely the sales monopolists and the introduction of taxes on consumption. In the important in the analysis of differential salt levels of consumption, in particular among the poorest. From the economic point of view, this book is a contribution to reconstruct the complex history of salt production and consumption in India under the English government from the late 18th century until the 1880s, that involves the control of the marine saltwork production of Portuguese India in Goa after the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1878. From the environmental perspective, it is a remarkable study about the relationship between consumption, health, and well-being around the benefits of salt. Firstly, because Rayton distinguished different levels of consumption, distribution of salt, food salt as a commercial concept, uses of salt as a food, and finally from the ingestion of salt, a dietary concept. Secondly, because Rayton, considering these differential levels of consumption, analyzed the difficult access to salt by the poorest classes and their impacts. The use of this exceptional source should be a contribution to enlarge the knowledge about the path of military surgeons and their role in the history of 19th century medicine, the perception about the connection between health, disease, and the environment and conditions, the gathering of comparative human behaviors, questioning outmodal ideas about air, water, and place that led to an approach to extra-European and colonial world, and finally, the study of how medical expertise, philanthropic concerns, and the relationship between disease and poverty structured ideas and actions in the 19th century. In the frame of the expression hygiene is used in several manuals published everywhere in accordance with man's needs and his intellectual capacity, strength, health, longevity, calm, and peaceful retirement. Those manuals contain recommendations adapted to the public and professional sphere, namely the preventive and therapeutic role of food, which has opened to new questions on the relevance of consumption patterns for the preservation of health and its recovery. In this context, the different perceptions between the appetite for salt and the taste for salt pressed research on salt on a global scale. Our source is from a Rayton book. The biography of the surgeon James Rayton, Major of the Army of Madras, India, of the British Empire, is very incomplete. According to the publication of the India Office list, he joined the service as deputy surgeon. He works in the hospital, medical college in the University of Madras. He was superintendent of the central prison in Madras. And he wrote not only the handbook of common salt, but also a treatise on tetanus and a program on surgery, about a syllabus for surgery. In 1882, he published the second edition of his book, entitled with this name. 5 years later, it was the second edition, 5 years later, a previous and shorter edition. As he explained in the second edition, it was a more in-depth version after a travel through Europe, broadening his knowledge of salt production throughout the world. He wrote about salting and alkaline products from Cheshire, sea salt from estuaries and the coasts in France and in the Mediterranean, including Portugal. His track record shows that he worked at Madras Government Service, and he wrote an unpublished report entitled Rayton Salt Reports, in which he describes the best methods to produce an excellent sea salt, a base salt manufacture, an expression related with his visit to the salt of Bay of Guérande, France. We can conclude that he was a committed observer and a user of specialized bibliography. The context of this publication is related with the policies of the British India Empire. Indeed, the supply needs of local salt consumption was controlled by the English commercial company, which monopoly was abolished in 1863. and replace it by a tax system. The excise system provided the control of the production and sale of salt under license to ensure the production of pure and clean salt for the consumers and to protect government salt tax incomes. Due to the increase of duties, the price of salt became exorbitant, and the Indian Salt Act of 1882 imposed general rules. Economically, the rise of salt duties seems to have been a terrible mistake of the government because income, billing, and control costs were not always profitable. It was in this context that an Anglo-Portuguese treaty signed in 1878 but implemented only in 1880s opened a new chapter in economic relations between Portugal and England to establish an economic union between the Portuguese India, Goa, Damau and Diu, and British India. The treaty aimed to finish with customs duties between the two Indies, Portuguese and British, ensuring freedom of trade, navigation and transit of goods imported and exported by sea, with special provisions concerning salt, spirits and opium. One of the conditions of this agreement was the monopoly of salt production in Portuguese salt pans of India, as well as its trade, under the Bombay government of British India. In return, the English government supplied an agreed amount of salt for local consumption. Brayton refers precisely the Goa case to praise the fact that the Goan government, Portuguese Goan government, donated 1 pound of salt per month by head to the poorest. However, after the treaty, the average amount of salt actually received by the people of Goa for their domestic use was much less than the agreed amount. This case justifies Brayton's convictions about the model of distribution of salt for consumptions. That means the tax rates are only legitimated if they respect the salt consumption's needs for the poorest, ensuring their physiological needs. I quote. This argument is the leitmotif for a large explanation about the ingestion of salt by the poorest and the tax's impacts in their health. Physiological perspective is the term used by Brayton, as we stated. His arguments as of a physician of his time, beginning to describe the differential qualities of salt, that means, and the particulars, the composition of salt, and he begins from a normal or medium consumption of salt, using information gathered during his visits across Europe. His starting point is the calculation of the amount of salt per day excreted under ordinary circumstances. Numerous experiments in England and France have shown that the amount of salt per day was changed, and he compared the general calculation of consumption of salt per capita as the population and in statistics. And it shows this table in which we can see the difference. However, these statistics are calculated with the number of inhabitants and the total amount of salt used in the country in agriculture and for animal husbandry. For Brayton, the statistical tables are entirely misleading. He therefore refuses an evaluation of a commercial nature as this table shows. He is convinced that the differential consumption of foods and their composition in sodium chloride would bring differential needs for salt intake. He groups together the percentage of sodium chloride present in different food products. Indeed, the amount of salt needed to maintain a healthy body varies greatly with diet because more or less salt is already present in most foods. In this context, Rayton quotes a local surgeon, and uses this source. He calculates the sufficient consumption comparing persons in jails and persons in hospitals. Besides this experience, his calculations, however, as he said, corresponds to a Western market basket, because in British India, the number of salted fish, for instance, is almost impossible to estimate, and calculation can only have local significance. Rayton used these arguments to guide his future speech. Rayton struggles to calculate salt consumption among the poor. The first and most serious charge against the tax on consumed salt is that the tax is cruel and oppressive against the lower class of the population who need the greater amounts of consumption. For instance, they eat rice, and rice needs more salt than the European food. His conclusion, however, is not against the tax. The tax is legitimate if it is low, well calculated and redistributed for the development of other economic sectors, while ensuring the physiological needs of poorest. I want to highlight the precious information gathered by Rayton on differential consumption, food transition regimes, West and East consumption baskets, and the minimum salt required by health and by social condition. These calculs are not very far from actual estimates. I have no time to discuss that. These estimates could be re-examined for future work. Indeed, Rayton's book discussed the introduction of taxes, which led him to estimations of production, trade, and consumption, which allow us to construct comparative tables of synthesis. Finally, as he wrote, salt is a key element from a dietary, medical, social, economic, and political point of view, and it constitutes, in his words, the backbone of a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Inês, from these different approaches of the salt between in the British and the Portuguese Indian Empire. And to finish this diverse and rich session, we are going to the last speaker, and Costa from the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro, that will present a paper yet about salt, entitled From the Lake to the Sea, Extraction and Trade of the Salt in a Region on the Coast of the Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 1870-1900. The word is from you, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. And I would like to congratulate the event and the organizing. I would like to say that this presentation is a challenge for me because my English is in development. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So it's an honor to be here at this event, and the research I'm going to present today is one chapter of my master's thesis defended at the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro. Nowadays, I'm a student of doctoral at the University of Rio de Janeiro. But my master degrees was at the University Federal Rural. So that's what I'm going to present here. And it was in the postgraduate development, agriculture and society department. And the title is here, From the Lake to the Sea, Extraction and Trade of Salt in the region of the coast of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. All the sources here that I used to my research, they were researched at Brazilian Historical and Geographic Institute and in the National Library. But first, I would like to introduce the working region, known as the Lakes region, where we have so many salt lakes. And it has several cities, like these ones, Saquarema, Maricá, Araruama. This region, we have lakes, and this big one is the Araruama's Lake. And here, at this lake, we have the main point of extract of the salt. So that's why my title, From the Lake to the Sea, because the salt came from the lake and goes to the sea along the coast until the Rio de Janeiro city, the capital of the empire. This is a region that has environmental characteristics that facilitate salt precipitation. So we have natural salt pans and natural salterns that were studied by many geographers that came to this region, like this one, Alberto Lamego, in an incredible book called The Man and the Restinga. I will talk about the Restinga, it's the biome of this region. And he says the incomparable beauty of Cabo Frio Sea. Cabo Frio is a city, nowadays is the main city of the region, but in the 19th century was the main city too, but was this geographical point here that has this bay. The incomparable beauty of Cabo Frio Sea is due to this extraordinary absence of large rivers. All the load of small courses is deposited in the lagoons, land filling them. That's why such a pure salt sea through the Itajuru Channel enters the laguna, where the scarcity of water courses and evaporation transform it into a precious saline spring. So that is a region with strong winds and poor rain. So the salinity, the salinity of the water is so important, and the constant sun, and it's a hot weather, precipitate salts very, very easy. The local landscape is also marked by salt pans, as you can see. This picture is actual, and the technology used is still that of windmills, as you can see. That's another picture. So it's also important to talk about the region's biome, known as Restinga. This biome extends along the coast of Rio de Janeiro, and is part of the Atlantic forest. It's how the Atlantic forest represents at this beach. The region has an ancient indigenous presence of a people called Tamoios, who already extracted salt from the edge of the lakes. In the second half of the 19th century, the local production supplied the city of the Rio de Janeiro, the capital of the empire, and after the capital of the Republic, and was taken to Guanabara Bay by boats. So this is the plants, the biome Restinga along the coast of Rio de Janeiro. It's a region, a landscape marked by silviculture and fishing activities, and we have the abundant presence of the fish communities until the mid-20th century, when we have outro processo, né, acontecendo. So our part here is our importance here is the 29th century. Then, so in this space that are presented, where in the 29th century the discourse of domination of the nature was presented through newspapers, publications by industry societies, and purchase of land by financial companies. So I bring here some temporal marks. They are important, like 1980, the end of the salt law, when the Portuguese court comes to Brazil, and Brazil can produce and trade salt. It was prohibited. In 1923, the first artificial salinous salt pans in the region. 1950, we had lands law in Brazil. And 1980, the first joint stock companies, these financial companies, that the main objective was constructing salt pans at this place. The second half of the 20th century, the 19th century in the region, is marked by the advance of financial companies in marine lands. It's possible to observe the actions of financial groups with the support of the state. These groups occupied the territory with the construction of several artificial salt pans. So, a Sociedade Auxiliadora da Indústria Nacional was a private law civil society founded in 1831 in Brazil, with the aim of promoting Brazilian industry. Its staff included politicians and scientists who were dedicated to researching solutions to the country's economic problems. To popularize the new agricultural techniques, he published a magazine, O Auxiliador da Indústria Nacional. It's a source that I used, between 1833 and 1892, published monthly. The society also expanded its activities by establishing technical schools that provided courses in geometry, mathematics, physics, astronomy, and botany. Analyzing these through publications like the Auxiliador, we have this text that I think is so important for this research, because it says about the region that I'm researching. Estando esta freguesia colocada à margem da Lagoa de Araruama, compreendendo sua maior extensão, cerca de 3 léguas. So, if you read this, it's a text about dominate the nature and do the transformation, the extraction of the salt in a salt more hygienic and to the common use. So here we have another source that is a newspaper called Jornal do Comércio, when these financial groups, together with these institutes like a Sociedade Auxiliadora, né, da Indústria Nacional, they announced the trade of the lands to construct these salt pans. Analyzing these publications, we could see the utilitarian discourse of controlling salt extraction and consequently controlling the nature. It's important to remember that coffee was Brazil's main export product. So when we talk about industry at the time, we are also talking about agriculture and other extractive activities. Other spaces for disseminating these ideas and selling salt pans were the newspaper of the time, such as Jornal do Comércio, and this, Jornal do Agricultor. The structure of the salt pans left in this space from this time was used in the early 20th century by Portuguese immigrants from Figueira da Foz, who arrived in the region to work with salt. However, the desire for an extraction and a national salt industry would only come to fruition in the mid-20th century in the country. That is a research that I currently do. So some final considerations is about this change of the landscape and the construction of the salt pans in the land from a discourse of controlling, denaturing, and the salt by the science. And that's it. I would like to end. That's it. Okay.
So,
Okay.
Anna, you are finished? Anna?
Yes.
You
Yes.
finished?
Oi?
You
Sim.
finished?
Yes.
They told me, and there is in the chat, that we have only 3 minutes. Everyone has that in the chat. So I think we can go to the questions. Desculpe, pergunta à comissão organizadora se temos tempo para abrir alguma pergunta, se existe. Ninguém responde.
Se houver alguma pergunta muito rapidamente, podemos recebê-la, mas teremos mesmo que fechar a sessão nos próximos 2, 3 minutos, está bem? Temos outra sessão a seguir.
Então, eu tinha muitas perguntas, desculpem, a colocar a todos, mas é impossível. Agradeço aquilo que disse, não são palavras, o meu português é melhor que o inglês, não são palavras feitas, esta foi uma sessão variada, que eu tive, aliás, todo o gosto em estudá-la previamente, que nos traz interpelações entre o ambiente e a doença, que nos traz interpelações entre o consumo de uma substância como o sal, tão importante, até para vermos depois o que isso dinamiza dos circuitos comerciais, e até duas comunicações aqui a combinarem-se, os diários a mostrarem-nos como podemos, os diários de casas agrícolas, como podemos obter neles questões importantíssimas para o meio ambiente e para todas estas questões, e a primeira, que foi a primeira apresentação, que nos mostrou essas representações do meio ambiente, para as quais teremos de olhar sempre com, cada vez mais, com uma reflexão mais interpelante e interdisciplinadora, digamos, olhando uma visão comparativa. Estou a falar muito depressa, porque creio que são as 4 horas e teremos de fechar, se é que nos estão já a ouvir. Eu agradeço profundamente a todos os que participaram, quer de Portugal, quer do Brasil, de Rio Frio, falando de Rio Frio, que eu conheço bastante bem, como uma praia magnífica, embora fria, e vamos ter de dar passagem para a outra secção. Muito obrigada, felicito também a organização, que está aqui a doutora Inês como uma das parceiras desta organização. Muito obrigada a todos, e já recebemos outras mensagens de agradecimento e teremos de, com certeza, dar por fim esta mesma secção. Muitíssimo obrigada, muito boa tarde.
Boa tarde.
Continuação.
Obrigado.
Obrigada, obrigada.